Hello, impromptu listeners. I'm Shadi Hamid, a columnist with Washington Post Opinions. This week, we're sharing a conversation I had recently with Richard Reeves. He's the author of the 2022 book of Boys and Men. He's the president of the American Institute for Boys and Men, and he's one of the most interesting thinkers I know on what it means to be a man in 2025. His voice may sound familiar. Richard and I spoke about a year ago on Impromptu, but I wanted to follow up to talk through the cultural and spiritual origins of the problems many men are going through now, and how we can find our way out of it. We discuss dating, gender equality, whether choice is a good thing, and whether marriage is like canoeing across the Atlantic. I hope you find the conversation as fascinating as I did. Here we go.
Well, maybe just to start then, just how bad is it with men? Because your book came out in 2022, and you're probably the person who most popularized the sense that boys and men are falling behind and losing their way in American life. And, more politicians and policymakers seem to be paying attention to the problem. But I worry that a problem that I view as being cultural and even spiritual in its roots isn't going to have straightforward policy solutions. So I'm curious how you would respond to those two things there.
Yeah, I often think we need an anthropologist to help us with this more than an economist, right? Because I do think some of this is cultural. I think it's about identity. And what do men want? Everyone needs to feel solid ground beneath their feet. And what gives you that is a sense of I'm connected to this community needs me, I have a role in this community, I have a distinct contribution to make to this community, not despite being a man, but because I'm a man. And so I think actually at root between some of the turn to religion, some of the kind of online stuff that's happening, is this just sort of sense that a lot of kind of men have, which is this sense of not being sufficiently grounded, connected, woven into the fabric of society, whatever cliche or image you want to use for it. And that actually is, to some extent, an underlying cause of some of these data points that I can otherwise give you bullet points for. The trouble is, I can't prove any of that stuff that I just said. I think every human society is engaged in a contest for the allegiance of young men.
Okay.
And the question is, who wins it? And what wins it, right? There's always a contest. I think that's different. And I think it's different for young women. And so the question is we need the allegiance of young men in one way or another in every society. Who's going to win that battle? And I think that we've sort of abandoned that to some extent. I think that one of the mistakes of modern societies and advanced economies is to think we don't need to compete for the allegiance of young men anymore. Everything's cool.
Yeah.
That's not gender stereotype. That's just cool. Everything's cool. Actually, you know what? The work of turning boys into men and the work of actually making kind of young men feel allied to a cause is actually permanent work.
So in your work, you focus on disparities in male employment and graduation rates. But men are also increasingly struggling to find partners and get married.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the numbers are pretty remarkable. I mean, Pew has found that 28% of men aren't married by the age of 40. That's crazy to me. And so I'm wondering if you, as a father of three boys, have talked to them about this question of partnering. I mean, I assume they come to you for dating advice to some extent, right?
No, they haven't. My boys have not come to me for dating advice, Shadi. I think for a number of reasons. I think one is that they think that a 56-year-old may not have the requisite knowledge to guide them through the current dating market. And there's also something incredibly embarrassing about asking your dad for dating advice. So they have not. I have asked them for information about what the current dating scene is. And I think to some extent the role of a father here is just model kind of relationships in the world, including with women, including with their mom. But I think it's more about equipping them with the skills and way of being in the world that will be good in the dating market, right? But you're not doing it as dating. You're not I didn't sort of set about to make my kids like awesome catches, right? I didn't say, I want them to be a great catch. I wanted them to be kind and competent. But I think that actually, if you're kind and competent, you're probably going to do pretty well in the dating market, right? But I do think it's such a different world. I'm learning more from them, not about dating, but about like the change in the landscape for mating, dating, romance, or courting, to use a very old-fashioned term.
And what have you learned from them, if you had to sum it up?
The thing I find most interesting is that the value in the dating market of agency and competence among young men has in no way diminished. There's this very interesting exchange that Charlie Kirk just had with a couple of podcasters that Megyn Kelly then picked up on about whether you should pay on the first date. And he just accuses this guy of being a beta male. And it's just like, of course, that's just a tropey thing. Like, should guys pay on the first date? It's silly in a way. But I find some of these things quite interesting. So I'm going to give you two examples. Right? One is like, yeah, he should. But why? Partly because he's asked them out. And one of the things that I've tried to raise my boys is to have the courage to ask a girl out, the grace to accept no for an answer, and the responsibility to make sure that either way she gets home safely. I think what that does is that captures a few things. It captures a sense of agency, right? You're not sitting there waiting. You're willing to put yourself out there. You're willing to take a few risks. I think that's attractive and important. Number two, no sense of entitlement here. Like the world is importantly signaling to you that there's no male entitlement. But thirdly, a protective and responsibility role. And so actually I used to extend their curfews if they could convince me that the reason they were late was because they were getting someone home safely, a girl. And so I think there's something still important about those symbolic, ritualistic, gendered behaviors that we can retain even in a world of gender equality. And back to the paying for dinner thing, what my son said to me, and he happens to be a public school teacher, so he's very sensitive to these economic questions. He said, the reason that you pay on the first date is two. One, if you ask, that's an expectation. But two, you're not signaling, I'm going to be the breadwinner. You're not signaling, I'll do the economic resources. Don't you worry your pretty head about money, right? What you're signaling is you have some economic resources.
Yeah.
Right. So it's interesting. That's an interesting distinction. Like what the women are saying, like, I don't need him to pay for every meal, but I need him to be able to pay for some meals.
Yes.
And so it's a signal of economic resources, labor market success, etc., which is very important to women. And I think conservatives mistake that for saying what the women are saying is, I need a man who's going to look after me for the next 30 years. No. They need a man who can look after himself and who's competent in the labor market. That's a very different signal.
So just to dig a little deeper on the problem of dating, it seems to me a lot of it is a problem of choice, the illusion of unlimited choices in the world of dating apps. And I think people are familiar with the idea of the paradox of choice these days, which is that more choices don't necessarily make us happier and can often lead to paralysis. What do you think of that? How do you choose a partner when you have so many choices?
Look, I'm still enough of a liberal pluralist to think choice is a good thing. So I'm always sensitive to this question because I think that one of the great advances of modern societies has been to widen our choices, right? I live in Butler, Tennessee, and I went to our local museum recently, and there was a ledger of this woman who had 20 kids. 20 kids, this woman had in the middle of the 19th century. And then what happened to them? Some of them died, and then 4 of the 20 had married kids from another family with another family. So 2 families had 4 intermarriages with them, right? Because this is in rural Tennessee in the middle of the 19th century, right? Not many choices. So the Duggars are going to marry the Whiteheads or whatever it was, right? And then I think about New York today and think, well, there's millions of people you could date. I don't think that's worse than rural Tennessee, where it was like, well, you're going to have to marry a Duggar or not get married, right? Or I think that generally that's good. The broadening of choice is good. My interpretation of the paradox of choice stuff is if there are like 48 different jellies, right, then you stand there like, oh, do I want this strawberry? Right? And you can analogize that to like a million people you could possibly date in New York or on Bumble or whatever, right? I don't think the problem is that there are 48 jellies or 4,000 people on Bumble. I think the problem is that you don't just go and say, oh, yeah, I'll have that one. That's good. I like strawberry. It's right. I just grab one. Because in the end, that's fine. I just need a good enough jelly, right? So I think actually it's the perfectionism that's the problem, not the choice. I think that people misperceive the fact that they have all of this choice as meaning that they should be aiming much higher in terms of the quality of the product. But I just think it's like partly like, to use economic terms here for a moment, like actually, we're optimizing rather than satisficing. If the choice leads us to think, is you should keep searching and searching and searching and searching through these multiple choices, because with all this choice, surely I'm going to find the perfect person, the perfect jelly, the perfect coffee bean, right? If choice makes you think that, then you are definitely in trouble.
Huh.
What I'm saying, Shadi, is find someone that will do and marry them.
Okay, well, so that would suggest then a case for settling.
What a terrible verb that is. Look, you want to fall in love, right? I think there's no question about that. Let's be romantic about this for a moment. Like, I think falling in love is like a part of it, right? I don't think that you should have a list, a checklist, and say, well, they've got 7 out of 10, that'll do, right? I don't mean that. Because the truth is that life, marriage, parenting is a rock-strewn, crisis-driven emergency. Kids are going to get sick. You're going to get sick. People are going to lose jobs. I mean, like a lot of stuff is going to come at you. It's like driving along a mountain road whilst constant rock falls. That's what marriage is like. I think what's happening is that we're overweighting the process leading up to the choice and underweighting the journey that happens after the choice.
Yeah.
It's like choosing a canoe that you're going to cross the Atlantic in. Do you know what I mean? Are you going to paddle together? And I think that's part of the problem, is that if you overweight the choice element, then I think you create this grass is greener, or I've made the wrong choice thing on the other side of it. One of the things that I think conservatives really have right about this is to be like very, very much like, you stick at this thing, right? Like, I don't agree with their legal positions on divorce and so on, but it's like, for better or worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. I mean, those are very, very profound things.
But what you're saying also suggests that the stakes are considerably high. I mean, if you think about it in terms of parental emergencies and the challenge of raising kids with another person, that takes us even further away from the jelly example where the stakes are quite low. I think so. Even putting aside choice, when there's a sense of the heaviness of the choice, that can make it harder to act, even if your choices are somewhat limited.
That's the challenge. That's the that's the trap. And I think what I'm almost trying to say the opposite. What I'm saying is, no, actually, within certain margins, and just as long as you've got this heart connection with this person, actually what matters more is how are you going to be in the relationship. So just gender it for a moment, because there were two guys talking about this. It's less about picking the perfect wife and more about being a good husband.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the trouble is that you emphasize it all about, it's up front. And I would say that at least half of the success of a marriage, at least half, is about how you are after you've made the choice, not the choice itself.
Okay, this is really fascinating stuff. I want to ask you more about this idea that women don't need men as much as men need women. But first, we have to take a quick break. Welcome back. So, Richard, I just want to flip the perspective a little bit. Now that many women have financial independence and successful careers and sometimes earn more money than their male counterparts, it seems kind of like women just might not need men as much to play the old traditional gender roles.
That's true.
And it's caused this discourse around heteropessimism, heterofatalism, and women even talking about exiting the dating game altogether. So it seems like there's an imbalance there.
Right.
What should men's purpose be in light of these changes? If they're not playing the role of protector and provider that they were almost required to play half a century ago, what does that really mean?
What I think has happened is that the old version, the old marriage, what it did was there was an economic dependency of women on men, and there was an emotional dependency of men on women. And we worked very hard to reduce the economic dependency of women on men. Yay. Hallelujah. Here for that, genuinely. I think we kind of understate the extent to which actually men need that connection, that purpose, the need to be needed. And they got that through marriage. And that women don't have that same need for institutions to tell them that we need you, because they know that they are going to be needed to have children and raise and nurture those children. Again, a lot of this is subconscious, right? So like the question of like, does the tribe need me, is a question that at some subconscious level, women just don't ask. It is a question that men are constantly asking themselves at some level. Does the tribe need me? Does the family need me? Do my kids need me? Do my neighbors need me? Does my employer need me? Does my wife, does my partner need me? Who needs me? And actually supplying men that sense of being needed is hugely important. And what the old marriage formula did was it said to me, like my dad, he never questioned whether he was needed. When he got made unemployed, he had to go get another job. And he said, I got to get another job. I said, because I need to look after you, right? He had all kinds of challenges, but he never once woke up and said, I wonder if my kids need me. What if my wife needs me? Wonder if my community needs me? It's like, no. Like, if anything, he probably may feel over needed. So where are we now? The question is, do women still need men, but not in that economic way to anything like the same extent? Do they still want men? Is life better with men? And so I do think in some ways the threshold has risen. And I do think that women are exercising some of their abilities to select out of marriage now that they no longer require it economically. I think we can only see that as a primary good. But we can also be grown up enough to say, hold on a second, this is going to have all kinds of second-round consequences for men if we're not careful. We're going to have a lot of surplus men. I think one of the consequences of the new gender equality that we're achieving is to put a much higher premium on relational skill to manage the new relationships. And so I think one of the things we're seeing is a big, that the men who've got high relational skills are going to be fine, and they're going to be sought after, and they're going to be good partners. And the men who've got low relational skills are going to really struggle in a way that they didn't before, because before they could make up for their lack of relational skill with a paycheck. That world has gone. And that's a tough transition.
But even if some men improve their relational skills, you're still going to have a problem of surplus men, because if men need women, but women now don't necessarily need men, then the marriage market is fundamentally unsettled. And we're going to have to accept the fact that more men are going to find themselves unpartnered. And then there's a bunch of second order consequences that come from that. There's really no solution in some sense. Like at a fun.
But we're just moving from a world of need to want. So two things have to happen. Maybe actually men need to learn how to need marriage less, to need women less, by getting better at male friendships, by becoming more skilled, by like doing some of the emotional labor for ourselves that previously our wives did for us. Let's just call it as it is. Right? We're going to have to do better. Right? We're going to have to actually show that we can flourish without that old settlement that we had. Right? I think also, by the way, I think that will make us more attractive. I think one of the ways to make yourself kind of more attractive is to kind of signal that you've got your act together. Right? I think it's one of the reasons why women say that they want men who've got good earning potential. I think it's wrong to interpret that as the conservatives do, as that's because the women secretly want a male breadwinner who's going to let them stay at home. No, it's because they want a guy who's got his together.
Yeah.
And the labor market is an amazing signal of that. I think to understand the current dating market, you have to understand the fact that the most economically powerful women in the history of the world, college-educated American women, 90% of them are getting married. The ones who least need a man are the ones most likely to be with a man. And what that tells me is that they do want to raise their kids with a man, and that they would prefer everything else to be with a man. And so I actually think that you could reverse the heteropessimism thing completely on its head and say that if you went back to the women's rights folks of the 1970s and said, it's 2025, 40% of women now earn more than the average man. Earnings for college-educated American women are at historic highs. What do you think's happened to the marriage rate among those women? They would have said, great, they'll all thrown off the shackles of the marital ball and chain. They'll have abolished the patriarchal institution of marriage. And I'm like, nope, completely untrue. They're all getting married. They like getting married. They like raising kids with someone else. It's a different kind of marriage. And so that gives me a lot of hope. That's a massive signal of hetero-optimism. That tells me that women do still want men.
Yeah.
Thank God for that. They just don't want us. They don't need us. They don't need us in quite the same way, but isn't that better? Isn't that a better marriage?
Yeah. I just wanted to end on the politics of all of this, because whether we like it or not, conservatives are the ones who have paid more attention to the male malaise. And liberals still seem uncomfortable addressing it to some degree. And I remember when your book first came out, I just basically assumed you were a conservative because you were writing about men in this way.
Yeah.
So just curious your reflections on that, because there is a kind of partisan gap here still.
There is. It comes back to where we started, which is, it is remarkable to see 3 Democrat governors issuing incredibly strong statements or plans on boys and men in 2025. Let's be honest about this. Until November 2024, I was really, really struggling to get any Democrats, with the exception actually of Wes Moore, to take seriously the challenges of boys and men. I will not say I was banging my head against a brick wall, but it felt like that, close to that sometimes. What changed? They lost the votes of young men. The penny has finally dropped. And so in some ways, all it took was a kind of like humiliating election defeat, partly at the hands of young men, for Democrats to think, maybe we should pay more attention to young men. And so because it's so cultural and so personal, I think it's just a very difficult issue to kind of keep in the middle and keep kind of mainstreaming this issue. But my long run goal is just to keep it mainstream. I want to get this away from the culture war stuff, to be honest. Because I think in the long run, even these issues around dating, I think they are related to kind of men's economic situation, their education, etc. We published a piece on marriage, which you can look up, showing this kind of massive class gap in marriage. But one of the most interesting findings in it is that in low-income communities where men are doing a bit better economically, the marriage rates are higher. It's clearly causal, right? And so, if you want more women marrying men, then equip the men to be more successful in the labor market and in life. Women want men, but they don't just want any men. They want men who are equipped and who are flourishing, and vice versa. So let's equip men to be flourishing.
I think that's a great place to end the conversation. Thanks so much for talking to us today, Richard. It was great to have you.
Amazing.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson and Regina DeHeer, and mixed by Emma Munger. Thanks so much for listening, and please keep watching this feed for more interesting conversations from Washington Post Opinions.